Let's start off this episode talking about dissociative identity disorder, which was previously called multiple personality disorder. You probably have heard of that, and I'm sure lots of people are still using that moniker, but uh, officially it's dissociative identity disorder, often referred to as DID. And this involves a disturbance of identity in which two or more separate and distinct personality states or identities control an individual's behavior at different times. Now, the average, and they're called alters, okay, remember that please, alters. The average is about 1.5. And remember, that's an average. So, it's like what's the average number of children people have? 1.5, So, sometimes up to 100. I don't know. That seems a little debatable to me, but people have expressed that. This is a very rare disorder. This is not common in any way. All right. So, when the alter is in control of the original sourced person, that person is unable to remember some of the events that occurred while the other alters were in control. The other identities, alters. These different identities, and as I said, very important word, alters, may exhibit differences in speech, personality, handedness, eye movement, attitudes, thoughts, and genders. Now, one of the ways they figured it out, because a lot of people don't believe that this truly exists, and as I said, it's very rare and more often in a Western culture than another. But in a case study, the alter could write with their left hand beautifully, but they were right-handed. Their core person was right-handed. How does that happen? How can you be proficient in writing left-handed? And the other case study that made them believe that this was true was visual acuity. One of the alters needed glasses, and the core person did not. So, and then they did a brain scan and saw a difference in the brains visually between the two people. So, that is unbelievable. The differences can be very striking. Some alters are stable, some are aggressive, sexually promiscuous, and when help is sought, it's usually not the original person who seeks help, but one of the alters. Now, one of the alters who might be more stable than the person. Now, it is not totally understood as to why this disorder occurs, but it is believed to be caused by a traumatic event. A traumatic event, remember this, in childhood. Okay? This could be torture, sexual incest, lack of social support after the trauma, could be war, disasters, various reasons, neglect. People with dissociative identity disorder have these blocks of amnesia, and the word amnesia means loss of memory. And they will run into people who claim to know them, or they find themselves in an unknown place or owning things they don't remember buying. So it can be very, very tricky, very tricky. And this abuse occurs when they're very young. And that is the belief as to why it occurs. there is a lot of comorbidity with the disorder. And remember, the term comorbidity means disorders co-occurring. So, comorbidity with dissociative identity disorder, you could have depression, cuttings, anxiety, suicide, panic attacks, substance use, eating disorders, anxiety, confusion, memory loss, delusions, really a lot of disorders. Personality disorders. I used to be, this is a long time ago, I worked for a women's center in Jacksonville, Florida, and I worked with adult survivors of sexual abuse. And it was a group of women, and they all had borderline personality disorder, and we'll talk about that at the end of this short semester. But a lot of the women in the group said, well, we have multiple personality, and at that time it was called multiple personalities. It changed in 2013 with the DSM-5. But in reality, the women did not have multiple personality dissociative identity disorder. What they lacked was a core sense of self, a sense of identity. So they felt like they didn't have, that they weren't a whole person. And when you have this type of abuse, such as childhood sexual abuse, it's understandable how you would never have this ego, this sense of self. And they interpreted that as having multiple personalities, but they just hadn't found a sense of self. And that was like really, really sad. And they probably, at this point, they were going to be in therapy the rest of their lives. And they're never, they, with borderline personality disorder, we'll talk about that at length. It's really hard. It's really hard to be in relationships. It's hard to function, and they definitely had dysfunction, distress, all the components. Oops, sorry, that was my glasses, of a disorder. So, dissociative identity disorder, it affects all people across all ethnic groups and incomes, but please remember this, it affects women 9 times more than men. All right, so that's quite important. So, the treatment of it. Now, you probably already can guess that the goal of treatment is to incorporate those alters into the one person. And so that the one person becomes whole, and they don't need all these alters to manage their life for them. So in order to do that, you obviously need psychotherapy. Sometimes they'll use hypnosis in this case, but I have to tell you that hypnosis can be detrimental. As in the case of Sybil, there's a clip on your Moodle page where you're going to see Sally Field, who portrayed Sybil. This book came out in the early 70s. I was like in junior high school, and it was like so popular, and everyone read it. And then they made this movie, and Sally Field played all the different alters, and she did an amazing job. She won an Emmy for it. But the woman, her psychiatrist, I actually just took down some of these extra videos that I had, because I just feel like this is like so overwhelming for you in this short period of time. I just have to remember that if it was a regular class, you'd be spending 2.5 hours listening to me talk, and then you'd be expected to do work at home as well. And it doesn't really work that way in the summer. Everything is like really jammed in together. So, but what happened was, this doctor, she really wanted to study multiple personalities. And so she was treating this young woman, Shirley Mason, and what she did is this is so unethical, she hypnotized her, inserted ideas in her mind. Now, no one knew this until probably the past within the past decade, and the whole Sybil thing was debunked. She paid her for her living expenses, totally unethical. She hypnotized her, and basically, the Sybil believed that she had been abused by her parents. So hypnosis is a difficult thing. We studied it in Intro to Psychology. You can't use hypnosis in a court of law anymore because it's too easy. Not everyone can be hypnotized, but if you can, if you're open to suggestion, it'd be easy for people to insert ideas. So this made this psychiatrist like a star. And what happened is that after this case, now we're talking about a really rare disorder, all of a sudden people are being diagnosed with multiple personality disorder all over the place. They're opening clinics. People are being diagnosed. It's like, it was outrageous. It was so outrageous that people would be in a facility for years on end thinking they had multiple personality disorder. In the end, they didn't have any disorder at all, but their psychiatrist was driving a Mercedes. So this really became outrageous in the 1980s. So eventually, when they redid the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, they felt they needed to change the name of the disorder from multiple personalities to a dissociative identity disorder because it had such a bad reputation. No one was taking it seriously, and it is a really serious disorder, but it's rare. So all these cases in the 1980s, it was preposterous. It was preposterous. So people were really preying on other people. The idea is to break down the client's separate alters and unify them into one identity. Now, they believe that dissociative identity disorder may be an extreme version of post-traumatic stress disorder or an offset of, as I just talked about, borderline personality disorder. Now, here's another important fact, and it's interesting because the last quiz had a question around the same age. It's believed that there might be a window, an age window, which closes at around 9 years old. 9 years old. So the trauma would have had to have occurred before 9 years old in order for these identities to appear. The mean age of onset is 16 years old, and it does tend to be chronic. So that is it for dissociative identity disorder. And then we will move on to another topic.